Hey there, Sharon Horne-Ellstrom here. Welcome to day 28 of the Get Your Goals Annual Challenge. Today we're going to talk about, and for the next 4 days, for today and the next 3 days, to finish off the month of January, we're going to cover my absolute positive current favorite framework. I mentioned that I use lots of frameworks, and frameworks are just processes and systems that we use to make our life work and make things go more smoothly for us. And during the pandemic, actually at the beginning of the pandemic, I, like so many other people, found myself a little discombobulated because so many things were changing so rapidly and without our ability to control them. We had pretty much zero control over whether our bosses closed the businesses or not, whether our businesses were required to close or not, things like that. So during that time, I, like everybody else, needed to ask myself, well, what am I going to do now? Am I going to just sit around and watch Netflix and YouTube and whatever else for a couple of weeks while this blows over? Because that was my initial thought was, hey, this is going to blow over in a couple of weeks. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and everything will be fine. And lo and behold, a couple of days into it, I realized, this is not going to blow over. I need to do something different. What am I going to do? So that's when I started, and I'd been doing challenges, but I started to really say, okay, how am I going to take this up a notch to help as many people as I possibly can, including myself, through this crazy time? And that's when I started doing the 30-plus day Get Up and Go challenge. We did that for all of 2020 and 2021. Every other month, we would do a month-long challenge that just talked about different things that were going on, shared different tools that work for me and my life and have helped me out in different difficult situations. And out of that came something called the SOAP framework. Now, the SOAP framework, it's a process that I've been using on a subconscious level for actually years and years, probably decades, but I wasn't consciously aware of it. We all have ways and processes of dealing with challenges and setbacks and disappointments and obstacles, things that get in our way of getting what we want. And sometimes those processes work out and most of them aren't determined and planned processes. They're just ad hoc processes that have worked for us in the past. So if I'm faced with a challenge in, say, my romantic life, I usually handle that, and we all humans usually handle that in the same way that we have in the past. Now, if we've got a bad process that doesn't serve us really, really well, but we survived it in the past, we'll keep using that same process until something happens, usually a bigger obstacle, a bigger problem that shows us that that process isn't in our best interest. And that's kind of what happened to me during the pandemic. I realized that the way I dealt with situations and challenges in the past wasn't going to work for me this time, because normally my ad hoc way or my automatic way of behaving was when there was a problem or a challenge, I just went full bore into solving that, doing a gazillion different things and whatever I could to be active, involved, engaged, and solve that problem. Focusing on solutions, but just trying things. And that didn't work during the pandemic, because a lot of the things I would want to do and try were shut down, weren't an option. We weren't allowed to do them. It was against the law. Well, it wasn't really against the law, but you know what I mean. We were protecting ourselves from protecting other people by quarantining, or so we thought. So I came up with this SOAP framework because I took what I was doing and said, okay, how can I make that better? Because that's not necessarily, I get results, but do I get the best results for me every time? And my answer was absolutely positively not. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes powering through stuff works, sometimes powering through stuff is the absolute worst thing I could do, but I survived all of it, so my subconscious kept feeding me that same process. So I started to think, what is my process, my actual desired process? What do I want my process to be whenever I'm faced with a challenge or a setback or an obstacle or a problem, right? And I came up with the 4 steps. It's a simple 4-step process. How many things on the planet are really a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-step process? If we're getting into 7 and 10 and 20 different process steps, chances are we better automate a lot of that, or we're not going to remember and we're not going to do it. But a 4-step process, it becomes easy and automatic. So that's how the SOAP framework was born. It was born out of the pandemic, and it just was me figuring out, what do I do now what do I want to do? And that's what the S in the SOAP framework is all about. It's about our story or our situation that we're telling ourselves. Because a lot of times the situation isn't nearly as bad as we're building it up and making it in our mind and our imagination, right? Depending on your situation in the pandemic, mine, it wasn't bad for me. And I almost feel guilty admitting that, but I was already equipped to deal with all of the shutdowns and lockdowns and stuff because I had dealt with health challenges a few years earlier that had shut me down, made it, I'm legally blind now, so I couldn't drive. So I had already had to shut off a lot of the activities and things that other people were instantly being cut off from. So I guess I had practice for the pandemic and I didn't even know it. And I didn't necessarily go through it so gracefully at the time when I was first having my vision loss, but I've also been dealing with vision loss since my early 20s when I lost the vision in my left eye, and then my right eye just followed suit and started in about 2011 and kind of went downhill. 2010, I guess, and it deteriorated really, really rapidly, so that by 2019, actually by 2016 or 17, I really couldn't see very well, and it wasn't until 2019 that I got the legally blind diagnosis. So all of that being said, what does S stand for? S stands for our story or our situation. And in the framework, we create by looking at our current story and our current situation, and then what do we want it to be? Because usually the only time we'll notice something is when it isn't what we want it to be. So we ask ourselves, what is my current story? What is my current situation? And then what is my desired story, my desired situation? And that creates this gap. And the rest of the SOAP framework, the next 3 days, we are going to have a process for filling that gap. And part of why I want to talk about the SOAP framework today is because it has had such an incredibly powerful impact on my life and everyone else I've shared it with. And it takes a framework, a process, and then we do it a bunch of times and we install it in our subconscious so that from now on, whenever anything changes or a challenge comes our way, and how often does that happen? Some days, hundreds of times a day, right? The unusual or crazy things happen and we need to deal with them. If we could deal with the majority of those on a subconscious level so that we automatically choose the best thing for us, I think that that's an incredibly valuable, time-saving, decision-making, positive impact on our lives. At least it has been on mine and the people I've shared it with. So I'm going to share it today over the next couple of days, and I guarantee you we're going to talk about it. We're going to go through it every month this year, at least once. We're going to break it down step by step. All four. We'll do 4 days every month on the SOAP framework, and not just on it, but applying it to a certain area and aspect of our life, a certain challenge that you are facing right now, so that you can get practical use and practice with it so that you understand how powerful it is. Because sometimes we won't want to just do it automatically in a subconscious level. There are going to be some problems and some obstacles. I know, sad to admit, but we're all going to have problems and challenges for the rest of our lives, right? That's what keeps us going. And so sometimes we will pull the SOAP framework up to a conscious level, and we will say, okay, I need to sit down with a piece of paper or a napkin or a paper towel, and I need to map this out because I need to consciously attend to this situation. Vast majority of the problems and challenges that come up in our life, we don't need to sit down and write out a solution. We just see the problem. Here's this current problem and situation. Here's what we want it to be. What are our options? What are we going to do? What can we possibly do? Then we take action. We see if it worked and solve the problem. If it solved the problem, we don't need to think about it anymore. All right. So what's our action item today? Think about one challenge, setback, obstacle, roadblock, something that's happening in your life right now. Anything. I haven't picked mine yet. I'm sure I'll think of something. But think of a situation. I know. Mine is going to be upcoming heart surgery. That's my current situation. And then I'm going to think about what's my desired situation. And that's all we're going to do today, is we're going to think about our current situation, current story, and our desired story. And that's going to form a gap between where we are and where we want to be. All right, any questions, hit me up. Otherwise, I'll be with you tomorrow. Bye. Enjoy your story.